Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to ILMA's LubeTrends virtual town hall. See, we have a couple more folks still coming in, but we're very glad to have you with us. My name is Caitlin Jacobs. I'm the Director of Communications for ILMA. I'd like to start today by thanking our LubeTrends series sponsor, Chevron Oronite. We sincerely appreciate their ongoing support of this education series. And thanks to everyone attending today for taking the time to be with us. This is a critically important topic, cybersecurity. We've had a number of cyber breaches at member companies over the years, which I think goes to show how difficult it is to stay on top of cybersecurity as the threat keeps evolving and changing. We want our attendees to be part of this discussion. So as we're going along, please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box. If we don't get to all of our questions on the air, so to speak, we will follow up afterward. We have an excellent panel of experts today with us who will help us to better understand what all of this means for lubricant manufacturers today. Alexandra Bretschneider is the cyber practice leader for Johnson, Kendall, and Johnson. And Steve Stasiukonis is president of Secure Network Technologies. And Steve has actually worked with at least one of our members to help ensure that they won't be the next victims of a cyber attack in our industry. And Steve is actually going to be also speaking at ILMA Engage next month. So we look forward to welcoming him in person. The third person we have here is Wade Melnick. He's an account executive with Secure Network Technologies, and he's here just to, help with our Q&A portion, however is necessary.
Make sure we stay in line.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm only
So,
here to keep you guys in line. That's it.
that's great. So with that, then I will turn things over to you, Alexandra, and we can get things going.
Sure. So I'm going to share a slide deck here. And then, just a couple rules of engagement. Anytime we're talking about cyber and technology, I like to say that, let's make this webinar a safe space in the sense that there's no such thing as a stupid question. I promise you, if you're thinking it, somebody else on the call is probably also thinking it, and you're doing a favor by asking. So this is a judgment-free zone. There's no expectation that you should automatically already know something we're talking about. And sometimes we lose sight of what you do or don't already know. So please don't be shy to ask anything at any point. All right, let me get this set up here. Go. All right, did that pop up all right for you guys? Okay. So just very high level goals for today, right? Steve and I are going to introduce ourselves and then talk a bit about, what is the current state of cyber risk for organizations like yourself? Why should we care about it? And what's actually happening? Like, what are real life examples? What's real life data? Let's put some real context to this discussion for today. And then most importantly, then what can you do about it? So I promise you the goal of this is not just fear mongering. We want you to walk away in a state of terror, because if you really feel that way, you're going to feel helpless. And that's not the goal. The goal is we don't want you to feel helpless. The goal is we want you to feel capable, that there are things you can do. And this is a very real risk, but it's something that really can be managed. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve. You want to introduce yourself and your organization?
Yeah, Secure Network, Steve Stasiukonis. We've been doing security work since 1997 for a long time. A little history about this. We were pen testers early on. We built exploit tools at the beginning, and back around 97, that didn't exist. And then the evolution of cyber evolved. And around 2001, 2002, certain companies started getting hacked, and they weren't getting hit with ransomware, but they were getting hacked, and they'd lose data, exfiltration of their trade secrets, proprietary information, and knowledge. Became a forensic service, and incident response was just starting out. And that was the interesting thing, because we started to learn from the bad guys, and the threat actor, which is what we call hackers now, are probably the most sophisticated criminal. Learning from them, you understand they are truly intelligent, well-funded, very smart. And with that, we've learned about what they do and how they communicate and collaborate. And that's where intelligence services come about, which is open source intelligence, and finding stuff on the dark web on how these bad guys operate, how they collaborate, there's a bigger picture out there. So we're dealing with a very sophisticated threat. And that's what we're up against every day. We test networks, we respond to people that get hit. And when somebody wants to learn if there's something about them, we kind of pull back the curtain of the dark web and doing some OSINT work as well. So it's kind of our company in a nutshell.
Great, thanks. And I'm Alexandra, as Caitlin mentioned, with JKJ. So we're an insurance and risk management brokerage, but before your eyes roll into the back of your head because nobody loves talking about insurance. Insurance is a centerpiece in the cyber risk discussion, right? So insurance helps dictate the types of cybersecurity posturing efforts we should have in place. It dictates how things are responded to. It brings those resources to the table. So we're going to talk about that. But that's my pitch for saying why we're such an essential part of any cyber risk type of discussion, because it is a key player. And because of the insurance involvement here, we've got some cool data to share from what is actually out there and what's happening. My background, I'm a little unique in the insurance world because my background was on the IT consulting side. So I started my career at Ernst & Young in their IT advisory practice. I then did some telecom consulting, and I founded and lead the cyber practice here at JKJ. So JKJ, we're an independent risk management brokerage. We're based up in Pennsylvania, but we have clients in 49 states. We've been around for over 60 years. And just as a little fun, nerdy fact, we're actually the founder of the 401k plan. So the first 401k plan ever created was created at JKJ. Just real quick on the cyber practice, what that looks like. It's those three pieces on the bottom right corner. It's cybersecurity and prevention efforts and guiding you to a state of being insurable. It's then placing the insurance, and then it's getting involved in the incident response.
All right, thank you both for those introductions. So I guess let's dive into the important stuff. How do cyber incidents impact manufacturers like ILMA members in real life?
Steve, I'm going to let you take this first.
I think the one thing is that if you think your company's too small, you're never too small. There is a threat actor for everybody. And if you're making a product, if you're producing it, there's something to be taken from there. So the intellectual property, bad guys, it's not just about ransoming your business and then holding you really, at large for a decryption key, which that's the ransom, that's where it's going to go to. They will take the data that you have, exfiltrate it, and it will get sold. There's plenty of dark web markets that are out there that sell intellectual property, and the secrets that you have and the stuff that makes you money will get sold. So ultimately, that's why it's really important you lock stuff down. The fraud and everything else is obviously another problem, but you don't want to get caught up or you lose your product line in terms of that capability. You also don't want to get shut down where you're not making your product. And that's the one thing we see companies get hit. And Alexandra, when a company gets hit, and let's say it's a ransom, we're seeing between 2 to 6 months that they're down. What do you typically see?
Oh, that's a great question. So the average for a ransomware as of like a year ago was anywhere from 19 to 23 days that the impacted systems were down. And I agree with you. That's such a great point because I think everyone, when they think of technology, they think, oh, just restart it, turn it back on, plug it back in, plug it off, plug it in, and then we should be fine. And that is not how these things transpire. These are weeks on end of matters.
Yeah. So all those systems, everything tied to your business is really it's at risk. So whether it's production equipment that produce the actual end product, whether it's an HR system, payroll system. I mean, I was just at a casino out in Vegas and I talked to the folks at the MGM. One guy said, "Yeah," he goes, "We didn't get a paycheck that was computer cut or delivered. They were handwriting checks for well over a month."
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, the fact that they had the ability to write a check was even, once again, um, it was difficult. I don't think
I'm
they
going to
had
bring
the
up that MGM one a little bit later, but I,
yeah.
I just couldn't agree more. When you think about cyber risk in general, I like to say that it's not created equal. That the risk for one organization does not mean it's the same for another. There are certainly aspects of it that are industry agnostic, but when talking about yourselves and the manufacturing space, these are the things that you care about. Can we manufacture our product? And is the proprietary data that goes into doing that protected? Of course, then there's financial implications, right? Nobody wants to have money stolen. But what it's not as big of a concern is, oh, just a regular old data breach, right? We hear about data breaches on the news every day. Oh, so and so lost, 30 million people impacted. And I know if you guys are hearing that, you're like, okay, that doesn't really apply to us. We don't have tons and tons of individual information. So we don't really have that concern. For you, it's what's the uptime? Are our systems available to be able to manufacture? I don't want my intellectual property sold on the dark web, like Steve talked about. And then I certainly don't want any money stolen. When you think about then how does that manifest itself? Like how do these things happen? These are the things you've heard about, right? Certainly ransomware attacks, right? The idea that you get extorted for something, whether your data is encrypted or they've stolen data and they're extorting it, but it's an extortion attempt. Theft of money, that could be they hacked in and they stole it themselves, or they fooled you or one of your clients into sending money to somebody who is not who they said they were. A phishing attack could be phishing for anything. That could be phishing for information. I had one client that sent out, they had about 3,000 employees. They sent out 3,000 W-2s to a malicious actor in the middle of tax season, like right around now. This is a few years ago. So that wasn't actually an attempt for money in that moment. They were going to then monetize that information, but they fished for that piece of information. Denial of service attacks aimed at disrupting your system, lost and stolen devices, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the very last, of course, the unknown, right? What else is coming? You talk about AI, right? You can't get through any cyber or any really conversation anymore without somehow bringing up AI. But what is that going to bring to the table? In general, when you think about what is cyber risk, it's anything connected to the internet. And at this point, that's over 50 billion processes. We're going to talk a little bit more about how cyber crime like actually manifests itself, like real data behind it, but it's projected to cost the world $10.5 trillion this year. It's its own economy, and it's considered the world's third largest economy after the US and China, which is pretty extraordinary. Just in my time in working with cyber, these are the three main areas that I've experienced in terms of claim trends. You've got the data breaches that we talked about, and that has a lot of privacy and regulatory implications. The social engineering is that idea that you get fooled into sending money somewhere to someone who is not who they said they were. And then, of course, ransomware has an impact on your operations. I love this quote. This is several years old now, but I just think, Steve kind of started off by saying, just because you're small doesn't mean you're not a target. This is why. When it comes to these threat actors, the ransomware gangs, they don't necessarily care about your data. There's instances where they might be specifically targeting your data, but I'd say generally speaking, they don't. They know you care about your data and you care about your ability to operate, and that's what they're exploiting. And then Steve, you want to talk a little bit about the state of cybersecurity today?
So this is actually a slide that came out of a meeting I had with the next CIA director about 2 years ago. And I had a theory, and it was this, the threat actors that were out there were actually now becoming more efficient and obviously a lot more sophisticated in terms of their activity and how they were hacking companies. And really what it was the geopolitical issues tied to the war between Ukraine and Russia. And what had happened is Putin said, hey, listen, all these countries have imposed sanctions on us. And you know what? Go after, hack anybody you can. And ultimately, as a result of all the sanctions and things that were taken out of Russia, like for example, Visa, MasterCard shut down, IBAN, SWIFT, the ability to move money digitally to that country gone. We took away Starbucks, we took away McDonald's. They're pissed, they're upset. So ultimately, Putin said, you know what? Every state-sponsored bad guy, every organized crime group within my region, feel free to hack, and whatever you can take, make money on it. And ultimately, that's what's been going on. And in the way that Russia is recouping funds to actually help the war go against Ukraine, North Korea does it too. North Korea just scored $1.5 billion from, I think, a cryptocurrency bank in Dubai, and they're leveraging that for obviously whatever missile program Kim Jong-un is doing. These guys are driven by dollars, so you're going to see more of it. When they're making money like this and they're winning, obviously the incentive is to keep going, and that's the problem. And I think, Alexandra, that's why you're going to see, I think in 2025, a big uptick in hacking. That's the problem. Really going after a lot of businesses in terms of ransomware activity, as well as the exfiltration of stuff and being sold as well.
Yeah,
So
I mean, war is expensive, right? And war has so many residual implications of how it impacts others financially, and you got people looking to make a quick buck.
yeah, with North Korea too, it's interesting. And this came out of the FBI because we met with some of those folks. 50% of the funds out of ransoms that occur with North Korean threat actors, 50% of that is funding a lot of the missile programs that are been put together by Kim Jong-un.
Wow.
So that tells you what kind of dollars are involved. So big money.
Yeah, speaking of dollars and cents, let's put some numbers to this. What are the actual data trends? Can you guys share some real examples and data
Sure.
of what this looks like across the business world?
Yeah, I'll kick that one off. So there's a number of data sources I like to pull from. There's only one I'm sharing for today, but if anybody is interested in more data to substantiate really what's happening out there, I love to pull data from insurance carriers, from law firms, from incident response firms, from the FBI, from the Verizon data breach report, all the things, and really start to see like what are the commonalities from all these different sources, because there's no centralized database at this point in time. The government's trying to act as one, but not everything gets reported to them. So this is an organization called Net Diligence. So they're really a content media type organization in cyber. And they get claims data from a ton of the insurance carriers. So they're able to aggregate that together into some meaningful reports. Now, this is the 2024 claims study. Unfortunately, this means it only includes data through 2023. So it's slightly dated, but I'll tell you a lot of this still held really consistent through 2024. So this was looking at over 10,000 incidents over a period of 5 years. They define a small to medium sized enterprise, an SME, as anyone under $1 billion in revenue. I'm going to guess that's just about everyone on this call, but there could be a few over. So that's 98% of the incidents out there. So again, to Steve's point about it's not just the big guys that get targeted, 98% of all incidents are actually hitting SMEs, people sub-billion in revenue. The average claim cost, and this was all types of claims, from a small innocuous email compromise to, a filing cabinet getting stolen to a ransomware attack. So this is a pretty broad range. The average cost in total, you're looking at about 200,000 for a single SME, plus 25 in regulatory and other crisis services. Now, what I think is interesting to look at is, of all of those claims over the 5 years, manufacturing was second in terms of being targeted and the costs. So to think again that manufacturers are agnostic from cyber risk would be a mistake. Manufacturers getting targeted quite heavily. When you look at what are these types of events, again, ransomware was the largest cause of loss, followed by email compromise, and then hacking, and then so on and so forth. Lastly, what I think is interesting, when they look at ransomware matters only, so some of that other data was all types of incidents. You start to really just hone in on ransom events. Ransom demands versus ransom payments are different things, right? So the attackers tend to make a demand, I want $20 million, and then there's a negotiation before a final amount is reached. But it is good to look at what are the average demands and average payouts. So the average demands are in the millions of dollars. Now, the average payouts are fortunately going down in this trend. I think they ticked back up in 2024, but you're in the several 100,000 range, if not the $1 million range. And then when you look at business interruption, right? This is what I talked about before when I mentioned that the availability to your uptime, your ability to make your product is paramount. So what do business interruption incidents look like to organizations? And you can see here, that's a much bigger number than even just the ransomware attack. So this is about $1 million for an incident of business interruption. So one of the things you have to think about is, if my organization were to go down, what does that look like? How many days are we down? And then what kind of dollar impact does that potentially have to us? And it could be extraordinary. The last thing I'll bring up is, ransomware is really what does dominate the news. Ransomware data breaches is what we hear about the most. But what I experience the most across my clients, more frequently than ransomware and than anything else, is some kind of email compromise that leads to funds transfer fraud. So the threat actor is intercepting communication and using that to fool someone into sending money where they're not supposed to. This is a report from the FBI on the dollars going out the door fraudulently to malicious third parties. And you can see we were at $3 billion in 2023. So you have to imagine that's again gone up in 2024, and it's really material stuff. Steve, what kind of stuff are you seeing? What do these things look like in your practice?
Well, the one thing about all your stats, I think they're probably, those are very good stats, by the way, but I think they're super conservative, because the one thing, Alexandra, nobody ever wants to report it. We respond to an incident and start talking to
Agreed.
the customer. First thing they say is, don't tell anybody anything. Sign this document that says you won't disclose anything. And then they do everything not to report. It's probably the most embarrassing thing to deal with. And it's very difficult when you have to notify customers. You've been down that road, right?
Yep.
And people head to the hills. They're like, yeah, I'm sorry, but perhaps we can't do business anymore. And Alexandra, I'm pretty sure there's no insurance for customers that leave you, right? There's nothing that when you get customers that leave your business, I mean, how do you insure that?
So it's a yes and no. There's an aspect of business interruption coverage, and we'll get to it in a little bit, Steve, although I didn't get super detailed with it, but this is a really good question. So a lot of folks say to me at high level, business interruption insurance, Alexandra, I already have that. And what they're telling me is they already have it on their property policy. But unless you have a flood, a fire, a hailstorm, something that's a property cause of loss, business interruption insurance is not responding to that. You need a cyber policy that has business interruption that covers a cyber cause of loss. Now, business interruption is meant to cover the period of time that you're down, right? It's only while the system is impacted. So to your point, Steve, what about when I'm back up and running, but I still lost a customer, right? I lose somebody in my supply chain who's like, hey, I couldn't wait for you to get back up. I had to go work with this guy over
There
here
you
who
go.
helped me out in a pinch. And frankly, now I feel like I owe it to stay with him. So then you've lost that continuing revenue. There are coverages available called reputational harm that will pick up for a period of time. It's not indefinite. It might be another 6 months of buffer, but you can get some coverage that, hey, we're back up and running, and we're continuing to have a profit impact because of the loss of customers associated directly from this event. But it's limited. So there's some coverage, but there's limitations.
So yeah, no perpetuity on that one, huh?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. But I guess to your slide here too, this is where it all starts. So this is the typical ransom note. This actually came off of an incident from a group called Hive, and law enforcement shut them down. My gut says they got rebranded, but this is like how typical this is. Now the language is straightforward. Every bad guy talks this way. We got your network, we breached your data, we've exfiltrated your data. The knee-jerk thing is they'll say that it's always personal information, financial reports, any sort of proprietary data. The other thing that's interesting about this is that, once again, they're going to tell you to go to the dark web. They'll give you instructions how to get to the dark web. Use this browser, install this plugin. Oh, by the way, they have so many victims now, they give you a specific login and a specific password so they can keep track of their victims, which,
And a
believe it
help
or not,
desk.
yeah, and it helped us. And they call them customers, which is even more insulting. All right. And then the instructions are, once again, and you see this quite often, is just pay us, and don't try to do anything that's going to resurrect your environment. Don't talk to the authorities. Don't hire a recovery company. One of them, there's a group that was actually out there that said, please don't speak to this particular incident response company. We don't like them. What we will do is give you the name of other incident response companies
Wow.
that we do like that you should talk to. So they'll direct you on who they want you to negotiate with if there is any negotiation. These guys are winning. And they're really interesting too, because they've become so well versed in this. They become really tough negotiators. Um, and they have all the cards because they have so much knowledge about the network in terms of their victim. but they also find, and you know this, they find all the certificates of insurance. So they know what to start off in terms of bargaining and how to actually
Oh,
negotiate.
for
So
sure.
it's
That's
really tough,
yeah.
really tough. So yeah, it's a great example of what's out there. And unfortunately, that's where this world has become now.
What I love about this example, not that I love that these things happen at all, is when you kind of look at the bottom half of it with the guidelines, right? It's an example of how, in so many ways, threat actors are just preying on human nature, right? They prey on your human nature to be inclined to respond quickly to an executive that tells you you have to do something. You have to transfer this money today. We forgot to pay somebody. You have to go do this today. And like, oh my God, I have to help them. I have to do this, right? They prey on the MGM help desk. Steve brought up MGM. They had a major security incident, and it was because they called, the threat actors called the help desk and pretended to be employees needing help. So they prey on your need to help. And here, this example, we're seeing fear mongering, right? They're trying to isolate you and prey on your fear and just do this. Even interesting too, Steve. I don't know if you'd heard recently. There's a couple of reports of actual snail mailed ransom notes being sent out to companies saying, "Hey, we got your data. We didn't encrypt it, but we have it. And if you want us to be quiet on it, you're gonna have to pay us." And again,
Mm.
it's preying on that fear, like, oh my God, if I get this letter in the mail, this feels really serious. These people actually know, and what am I gonna do? And so much of it is human nature driven.
A lot of times when people get these notes too, and the one thing I've seen is they log into the site right away, a clock starts ticking and they give
Oh
you
yeah.
24 or 48
Yeah.
hours. You don't pay in 24 hours, they double it. 48 hours, they triple it,
Yeah.
and then they continue on. It's like they make your life miserable. So
Yeah.
it's unfortunate.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I can add that, even Ilma is we haven't been victims, but, there have been some attempts. One of my colleagues got an email the other day, impersonating me saying, "Hey, I need to change
Yep.
where my next paycheck is going."
Yeah. Super common.
And they've got our logo, they've got our address, they've got my title correct. So yeah, it's happening everywhere, and folks need to be smart. So speaking of being smart, now that we understand the landscape, what can ILMA members do about managing their cyber risk?
I think it's probably best to start with Steve, especially with the services that you guys provide.
Yeah, the one thing that, and this is kind of a shameless plug here, but I will tell you the one thing is to understand how vulnerable you are. And the goal is to go in there and really examine a network from an aspect of an adversary. So have somebody come in, test your network as if they actually got inside, and then can start going after data stores, mail, privileges, moving around to other places. But that's the goal. And then find all the attack paths that you have on your network, and then lock it down, remediate it. Somebody has to fix it and then test it again. And the goal is not to make things so restrictive, but to really make it difficult for the bad guy. And from this slide right here, it's the same thing that we see within almost every organization. And I'm talking big guys, little guys, medium guys, people with good IT departments, misconfigured devices. Networks get big, they're hard to figure out. They forget that this box isn't patched or updated. The hardware, when you see a piece of equipment that turns a shade of gray into like beige and looks like it's been in a room full of smokers for about a month, then you know that that box has got to go. Okay. And then patching and updating. It's interesting. They think that because the box or the device or the server or whatever sits on the inside of a network, that, what difference does it make? No, fix it, because that's a flaw within the operating system. Microsoft, Apple, all those guys are telling you to resolve the issue regardless of where it sits. And the same goes for your phone. Once again, they're not giving you a new version of Minesweeper. They're saying fix it plus the apps that are on it. Poor network structure. Ask your IT people this: is our network one big flat network, like one big happy family, or do we have segments to it? Because once a network is like a big flat network, a threat actor comes in full reign. He can move around wherever he goes. Make sure that that gets fixed. And security technologies, endpoint detection, stuff that if you got a bad guy moving around your network, the goal is to at least see the activity and then put a bullet in them. That's the goal. And if you don't have the resources, get help. That's the other thing. There's plenty of companies out there that will tell you we can help manage this for you. Focus in your business, make your lubricants, make your product, but do the things that you do best, and then leave this up to somebody else that says, hey, I do this every day. Makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. There's tons of stuff I don't want to do here, so I let somebody else do it. And frankly, they do it more effective and more, it's more cost effective as well. So these are big things, and frankly, this is the finding.
I want to chime in here. They can contact me if they need some help.
Shameless plug.
Yeah,
There it is, shameless. I had to get it
shameless
in.
for sure. Yeah.
No problem. So I agree with all of that. I'll give you some of the insurance company contacts. And like I said, because insurance carriers are getting involved in paying out these claims and paying out these things that happen, they're certainly incentivized to make you more secure. So while this looks like a lot of words, I'm going to walk us through it. This is not meant to be the exhaustive list of anything you should ever consider from a cyber standpoint. But if you really don't know, you can take this to your IT team as like a blueprint to say, hey, where do we fall in considering these types of things? So, the things in blue are really what I would say are kind of do not pass go, do not collect $200 type of cybersecurity protocol. So, for a period of time, you could not even get insurance if you did not have these things. That's still relatively true, although the market has softened a little bit. But these are probably the most critical items on the page to have. So having multi-factor authentication, but what does that mean and where? You need it on all remote access, your VPN tunnels, your RDP, anything. Your privileged access. So as Steve was saying, if you're going to outsource and get support and resources for your IT and cyber management, those folks should have their security really locked down because they're the ones that have the keys to the infrastructure castle. And then, of course, email access. I know that the CEO may not want to have MFA on their email because it could be one more step they have to take in a given day, but it's so critical. And making sure that, if this threat actor tries to get access to your email, this MFA prompt is what's supposed to help us try to thwart that. It's not a panacea. It doesn't stop everything, but it would certainly stop more incidents that do occur on a daily basis for folks that don't have it. Really locking down your remote connectivity. And that's where, a Steve and a Wade can help you, is they're going to see those types of things through a pen test. Patching. I can't tell you, unfortunately, how many incidents some of my clients have had because they had a piece of technology that just wasn't patched. It had a known vulnerability that let the bad guys go right in the door, and they had the ability to patch it, and they just didn't. It's just general cyber hygiene that things need to get patched and cleaned up. I was guilty of it too, right? You get the notice on your laptop, you got to restart soon. There's an update available. I'm so much better about doing that now, seeing that updates are really important. They make sure that they close holes and potential problems and gaps. And that's, an example of that. And then of course, backups. Everyone says, oh yeah, no, I have backups. And yeah, I think they work just fine. Either at the time of incident, the backups are also encrypted because we had them on the same network and the same access to get to them. So like Steve said, if the network is completely flat, they got right into that piece as well. So now they've truly, completely locked us down. Or the backups aren't any good. Just because the backup job said it ran successfully, have we tested it? Have we ever actually tried to restore one of our backups to see if it even captured any of the data? So backups, backups, backups. The rest of these things are really important. I would tell you if you had to be cognizant of where you're spending your time and resources, I would tell you employee training every day of the week. Employees are our most vulnerable aspect of the organization. So let's get them trained up to be vigilant, to be skeptical. Having an incident response policy. And then even as Caitlin had mentioned, where somebody purported to be her trying to change her banking for her paycheck, what is your approval process for changes to any kind of payments, whether it's to a vendor or to an employee? How do we authenticate the authenticity of those transactions? Then there's a lot of technology items, which I won't get too far into. And then of course, you'll see even in the top right there, the types of services that S&P offers. So pen tests and vulnerability assessments, like You're not in the business of doing this every day. So having a third party come in and give you a health checkup on your cybersecurity posture is really, really important.
That's all super interesting. And I think this does segue nicely into the insurance piece. So what exactly is cyber insurance, Alexandra? What does that really mean? And how important is it really for companies to have?
And I promise we'll cover this in layman's terms. I'm not going to get super insurancy here, but if you ever want to geek out with the insurance with me, I'm happy to do that on an independent basis. So in general, let's talk first about where does insurance even fit into the whole cyber puzzle? As I said, I think it's a critical part of it. But when you think about managing cyber risk, right, it's a combination of these things. A blend of security, cost, and convenience. And like, think about your passwords, right? It used to be sufficiently secure to have a complex password to get into your system. It didn't cost your company anything to do it because most software was actually formatted to allow for that. And it was mildly inconvenient. We had a lot of passwords we had to remember, but okay, fine. Then that kind of shifted and it became actually now to be more secure, we need MFA. Some folks had to spend money to deploy it if it had to be retrofitted to a piece of technology. And it's a little more inconvenient, right? Now we got to get the text to our cell phone or prompt to approve. But that's that constantly evolving triangle of managing cyber risk. Then there's people, process, and technology. Most of these cyber incidents that we experience are not necessarily a technology issue. It's the technology is going to do the best it can, but if we're not putting really sound people and process around the technology, it's all for naught. And then we buy insurance. Insurance is a reactionary product by design. It's meant to step in if and when something bad happens to help offset that risk from our balance sheet. No one on this call is accruing $1 million in their balance sheet just in case we have to pay a ransom. No, you buy insurance to offset that risk. So ultimately, your goal in all of this is not to be cyber secure because there's no such thing. It's to be cyber resilient. Can we sustain an event and recover? And do that in a way that's reasonable compared to our peers. So you'll be held to the reasonableness standard. If another lubricant manufacturer next door to me had an incident, what would I have expected them to do to have prevented it? And those are the standards in court. So when you get to the coverage, I have it really in 4 main buckets. Bucket number 1, like Ghostbusters, who you gonna call? Incident response. So cyber insurance will bring to the table all the necessary resources. So a digital forensic and incident response firm, a restoration firm if you need it to restore your systems, legal counsel so that everything's being done under the guise of attorney-client privilege, public relations if necessary. If there's that kind of data breach that you hear about every day and you have to go through notification, the cost of notification, all of that is part of your incident response. It's the most common part of the policy you're going to use. Then there's a legal and regulatory component. So Steve mentioned again the NGM data breach. So I found out I was part of it. I got the letter in the mail within 30 days of that whole thing being reported, telling me, Alexandra, you're part of the data breach. Here's free credit monitoring, blah, blah, blah. But what was crazy was 3 weeks after that, I got a postcard from an attorney inviting me to a class action lawsuit. That's happening every single day. So the amount of litigation now and class actions and regulatory investigations is really ticking up. And then, of course, there's cybercrime, paying for an extortion, the loss of the money if we get socially engineered and fooled into losing it. And then, as I mentioned, what I think is actually most important to the lubricant manufacturers on this call is the business loss. What is the impact to my business if I am down? How long can I be down for? What does that look like financially on a per minute, per hour, per day basis? And really considering all of that. Some just hot topics in the insurance world. Not all policies are created equal. There's no such thing as an ISO standardized form. So every carrier's form is slightly different. So you really do need to know the devil's in the details there. A common question is, how much is enough? How much limit should I be buying, Alexandra? And there's data breach calculators and things we can use to benchmark and certainly peer insights. But some of that's for you to figure out. What is the potential business loss? You know, if we're looking at ransoms being in the millions of dollars, we still need limit left over for dealing with that incident. Making sure you have social engineering coverage. Sometimes there's stipulations. Did you make a call back? There's so much changing in the regulatory world. I just mentioned the class actions. Unfortunately, I'm sure you've all heard at some point the rumors around claims being denied. And that does happen. I have seen that happen, that if we have a misstatement on our insurance application and it's material, we said we have MFA and we actually don't, an insurance carrier has grounds to deny that claim, and that's very concerning. And then the rest of it gets a little too insurance-y for today's conversation, but there's a lot going on there. The last thing I'll kind of round out with is, you know, insurance is really part of that overall incident response. So when you look at all the parties involved when there is an incident, right, you're going to have the company, their IT team, whether that's insourced or out, your insurance carrier, legal counsel, the forensics, and law enforcement. Law enforcement likely won't participate, but oftentimes they might need to be notified if there's financial loss or a ransomware event.
That's really helpful, Alexandra. And you mentioned that it's it's not really possible to be 100% cyber secure. So, God forbid, in the event that my company becomes a victim of a cyber attack, what should we do?
Take it to you, Steve.
Pretty much when somebody, well, here's what happens. Here's the scenario. Wade's been on these calls too. Usually we get the call on a Wednesday, Thursday, or a Friday, and somebody says, we see some activity on our network with logs from, let's say, China or Russia, and they're on the inside. Should we like do anything? And we're like, yeah, you should probably disconnect right now. And believe it or not, the number one answer is, we're going to watch it. And I was like, well, that's a bad idea. All right. As soon as they experience usually some sort of encryption or they see a service disrupted, now they're usually in panic mode. So the other incident thing is, hey, listen, don't start trying to run decryption tools or your antivirus scan. None of that's going to work because they've already figured out how to bypass all that stuff. Typically what happens is if you have that, get a hold of your insurance folks right away. And then if you can have a segment of your network that's pristine and only like that safe haven to like have that incident response team come in as a jumping point, coordinate all the IT people, the resources that you have, the guys that work on staff, partners, people that have understood your network from the day it was built, but really so that they can come in and kind of help in terms of if we have to rebuild, what do we have to do? A plan is very, very, very important. But the insurance guys will usually bring the IR people in and a legal team. And that's the other thing too is, the legal guys, the attorneys that are involved, just kind of steer the ship on what's going to happen because they're minimizing damage control. And it's so important to have a knowledgeable attorney in this space because putting things in writing, big no. Another thing, never mention to anybody that you've been breached. In fact, if you say the word breach on a call, they're going to yell at you. They're going to say, how do you know it was a breach? Don't ever say that word again. Other thing you want to triage, maybe we should go back to that slide just real quick. Systems that one's perfect. Yeah. Can any systems operate? Number one, don't trust any systems and any functions that are mission critical to the biz. If they're down, once again, start looking at what you're going to do to bring those back up in order after everything's been forensically examined, vetted, and we've ejected our bad guy. Also, a lot of times things are connected to vendors and customers. If they're affected, you got to figure out a plan for that. And frankly, I think that's a discussion between you and your lawyer. If you have resources that are available, once again, cautiously really make a good decision on whether to use them or not. Mail is typically taken over by our bad guy, so don't trust it. You might want to have a couple of Gmail accounts in your back pocket to communicate, not on your network. Do it off your phone or some other safe haven. But triaging what's going to happen to your biz as this is going on is so critical. And most companies don't have a process, they don't have a plan or a procedure for it. Usually, after they've gone through the incident, they'll put something together. But this is where being prepared is everything. It really is. I think there's another slide after this, Alexandra. I think, we talked about that. The language, once again, I think we mentioned it earlier, no longer use the common word hacker, it's threat actor. You haven't been hacked, you've had an incident. And God forbid you say the word breach on a call with a lawyer because they're going to yell at you hard. We've been on
Yeah.
those calls, we've seen it. It's never a breach. The B word shall remain something
Yes.
that is
Do
not
not use
said.
the B word.
It's a matter. We don't know what happened. You don't want to sit there and, all of a sudden incriminate yourself or your business. Use the guidance of your attorney or the insurance company's attorney that's been designated to help. Leverage that. So kind of a big deal. Those are probably the things you have to
Yeah.
have.
I
Yeah.
want to reinforce this because there are legal implications. And I know, in layman's terms, naturally people are inclined to be like, yeah, no, we're having a breach, or, there was a data breach. We've been hacked. I see it a lot when there's been an email compromise that folks will immediately, a lot of times when they get in your email, they might then spray an email out to all your contacts. You've all received the email at some point from one of your contacts where you're like, this does not look like they sent it. Like it came from their email. Like I could tell it's a legit email, but I don't think this is real, right? And that means somebody's likely in their email. And then folks I see have a tendency to then send another email out to all those same people. Sorry, my email was hacked. Like ignore that. And there's implications of that. There's legal implications. Privacy law has a defined term around breach. Like if you have a breach, it means you've had an unauthorized access of data. You don't know that yet. You can suspect it, but you don't know for sure until a forensics team has come in to confirm those things. So that's why the law firms are like, do not use these words. So this is something, again, that you should try to take away with folks, being a little more sensitive and cautious with your language because there's legal implications there.
Wow, this has been really helpful. So I guess, first of all, I want to remind our folks who are attendees that you're more than welcome to type any questions that you have into the question and answer box. The button should be at the bottom of your screen. But at this point, love to hear from both Steve and Alexandra. What are your key takeaways from what we talked about today? If folks don't remember anything else, what are the top things you hope they remember?
I'll give it to you, Steve, first.
Test your network and fix it. And that's the one thing I see, because I see such procrastination. I saw it with this healthcare agency for about a year. They put off a pen test where we were going to kick them hard, and they've got, well, we got these HIPAA obligations we have to meet. It was like they didn't want to do it because it was like we were getting in their way. The day that they told us they wanted to start, they got breached and they got taken down. They exfiltrated terabytes of data. Oh, how did that happen? Because the threat actor was reading all their mail. They had already been compromised. Once that happened, they had to go through the pain of an incident. But that's the thing they've learned. It's like now that they test their network, when they see the issues that we find, they fix them.
And
Don't let
Steve,
that, yeah, go
wouldn't
ahead.
you agree that generally speaking, I don't find that IT folks are resistant to that. I think the technical teams are usually the ones going, no, no, like I admit there's definitely going to be stuff I'm not aware of. Like I would love the look. It tends to be the rest of the organization that drags its feet.
It's everyone is civic. I see so many different scenarios. You know, we walk into places where IT is like, we know we got problems, but they won't give us any money to fix it. It was like, well, that's not going to work.
Yeah, that too.
And then that's a huge thing. And then the other thing too is like we see problems where there's no resources. It's like how many organizations, even small to medium size, are like two people operations in IT. They're trying to make every service work for that company, whether getting mail, an ERP system, all these different desktops. They're working like Amish farmers, okay? And they need help. If they don't get that help, then you know what? They're going to get breached because they can't do all the security work too. I see it all the time. So it's really, once again, I think that case in itself brings up to line number two. You got to buy cyber insurance. You got to do something, because when the FBI gave up on statistics with percentages. Now they just go, yeah, it's just a matter of time before somebody gets hacked. It doesn't matter how good they are, they will get hit. So it's a given. The FBI guys that I know, my buds, they're like, yeah, there's like no percentage anymore. It's just, yes, you have to be prepared. Um, Line number three, security partner. If you don't know somebody that can support your business that's cybersecurity centric, you got to have somebody, and they got to have a relationship. Um, it's kind of like that backstop for your guys at IT or the other company that keeps your network running. You got to have somebody out there. Number four, most important, without question, educate the users and stop doing all the testing. That's all the automated stuff where they just drill through a slide deck, hit yes, no questions, get it done so they meet the obligation. Train them so they understand that they're going to be at risk too, because when they get hit and they get hacked at home, they're not a productive employee. Their identity gets stolen. They lost their 401k, their IRA, or their Venmo account. They're not thinking about getting their job done at work. They're worried about how they're going to pay their next bill because they're lacking 5Gs in their bank account. I see it all the time. So organizations are pivoting and doing something very different, which is they're training them on not just what they need to do to be safer at work, but to do something for themselves at home. And it's actually resonating because everybody now doesn't want to become a victim,
Do you
especially
have
at
any
home,
resources you found more effective for that, Steve?
for doing that.
Yeah,
All on, it's all in-person training. It's just interesting. We had a company that was a major manufacturer of I shouldn't say they were in the industry for like automotives and stuff like that. We trained every one of their factory workers during a lunch break over the course of like 2 weeks during a shift for like a
that's really
shift change.
cool.
They had to because they were like, they don't care. The assumption is the company's made of money and that if something happens, they'll
Right.
just pay. So, but it actually got better. But training everybody's good. Nobody wants to see anybody hacked. We got plenty of calls from people that they're good people, that are hardworking people they get compromised. And it's a miserable experience to try to get your life back together. So that's probably the most important thing I see. But
I
maybe
love these. I'll just add a couple comments. So on the training piece, I'm such a firm believer that now in today's world, information security is part of every single person's job description. Every person from the maintenance janitor to the CEO is responsible for maintaining and protecting the digital assets of the organization. That is everyone's job. And it needs to be treated that way, right? That you should be told that at onboarding and then you should be trained on that. So I couldn't agree more. I think that's such a valuable piece. The cyber insurance, the one thing I'll caution is if anyone's thinking, oh, I think we have a little bit of cyber on our property policy or our general liability policy. If it's a throw-in coverage on another policy, it's barely worth the paper it's written on. You need an actual dedicated comprehensive policy, and shameless plug if you need help with that, I'm your girl. And then other things to consider, and I kind of broke it into like people, process, and this is again a wordy slide, but it's because you get to take this away from you with you, so you don't have to write these things down. But from a technology standpoint, a host of things you can do, stuff we already discussed, but mentioned lightly, like know your assets. Like, what do you have? What kind of information do you have, and where is it? So it's hard to protect what you don't know what you have. And then from a people process standpoint, really making sure you take times to make sure that your applications are completed correctly, that you have comprehensive insurance coverage, that you've actually maybe even done a tabletop exercise and done one of those mock scenarios. Like, all right, we're experiencing an incident. What do we do? How do we communicate? What happens? The training, payment processing process. So how are funds being moved around and making sure that they're authenticated correctly? And then timely reporting. So as Steve mentioned before too, a lot of this stuff goes unreported. But ultimately, even law enforcement, they're not trying to get these things reported to penalize you. They're actually trying to gather data so that they know who to go after and how big the problem is. So reporting it to your insurance carrier, getting the help you need, is really worthwhile.
All right. I don't see any questions popping up. We'll keep that open for another minute or two. But just by way of wrapping up, I wanted to let folks know that you will, everyone who's on the session here will be getting a email once the recording is available, and that will include the slide deck. So thank you to Alexandra and Steve for being willing to share those tools and tips that folks can then take to their IT team and their their management team and make sure that they're doing everything they can to protect themselves. And This will also be available in the LubeTrends library on the ILMA website under the Member Resources tab. I just want to say thank you again to all of you for taking the time to share your expertise with our members. Again, we understand what an important topic this is, and we really appreciate your time and your expertise. And finally, I would like to thank again our LubeTrends sponsor, Chevron Oronite, for their ongoing support, because without them, we might not be able to bring such important topics to our members, such as this. So yeah, thanks again to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you all again on the next LubeTrends.
Thank you.